Because right now, security is literally getting run over. You have to have consistency with the online world. What I wound up missing was the tribe, the team, the purpose, the mission. I was a lone wolf. Wasn't part of a bigger mission and part of a more defined team and a purpose. And I missed that. And that's what drove me back. Life is about change and challenge and suffering and contribution and playing well with others. And if you can do that well, then you get to be part of the team for a longer time period.
Right, Doug, I'm super excited to have you on this week's episode of the Silicon Valley podcast. Now, before we dive into the questions, well, one, for our audience out there, if you're listening to this episode before August 14th, Doug will be at the Create the Future event. Definitely what you get from this interview is going to continue and more at that event. So we hope to see everyone there. And actually, before diving into the questions, Doug, give us a little background of your career up until this point.
Absolutely. You just set the bar either. Like if I whiff this interview, then no one's going to come see our panel.
We can edit. Don't worry, you'll be good.
I've had, I think, a more unusual career than most because a lot of senior executives wind up finding their discipline and then sticking with that discipline through their entire career. They come up through the sales ranks, the engineering ranks. I've had a little bit more of a varied career. But before I even jump into the career, because it will be a theme through the conversation, for whatever odd reason, I can't really figure out why. I've gone through a lot of therapy and a lot of self-reflection and to try and figure out, like, why am I so purpose-driven? I know that's just a super topical thing right now, as purpose is so important, mission is so important. But for some odd reason, I have been fascinated my entire life with, like, who are humans? How do we operate? How do we make our species better? How do you help our species get better? I remember when I was 8 years old, we moved every year until high school. So I actually can pace exactly where my years were based on location. I remember 8 years old in a camping trip with one of my buddies, looking up at the stars and have a conversation about how can humans get past the limitations of some of our detrimental emotions, hatred and jealousy and insecurity and fear, so we can progress better as a species. So a weird intro because, like, why'd I get into tech? When I got out of college, I wasn't a computer programmer in college. I took a couple of classes and I came out thinking I want to be an investment banker or a stockbroker or a management consultant. And it was all about, like, how am I going to make money? I'm finally out of college and I waited tables through college and did all these odd jobs. And it's finally time to make money. And I interviewed with what became Accenture, is Arthur Andersen, way back then. And they had a tiny little computer consulting division, and realized, wow, tech is about spreading information, data, and knowledge more globally on a pervasive basis. And I viewed, going back, I was a history buff, I view it back to any of the dark periods in any country or with humanity that control access to information. Right? That's how one of the key ways you control population. If you make women not important, then automatically, like, 50% of the population is now more controllable. And when you open things up, better things happen. So my whole entry into tech was and remains that how do we help expand and grow and enhance humanity? But then career-wise, really weird career. I started out as a coder with Accenture, realized that I was going to be a mediocre coder. I wasn't going to be great staring at a computer and just helping prompt it with 3GL, third generation languages, with what to do. I miss people. I like to interact with people. So I started my vendor journey, started out as a inside sales, pre-sales-ish type person at Oracle, and then became an inside sales rep, and then an outside sales rep. After Oracle was actually small back then, we had just gone public. But at that point, I still looked at it and thought, it's way too big. It's getting bureaucratic. So I went to two tiny companies. I went to PowerSoft, which was a Series C at the point in time, and we've had a next generation visual development tool and integrated development environment. And then with Control Software with one of my manager and one of my good friends at Oracle, which was pre-product, pre-revenue. And then founded my own company, iCarrion, where I became CEO. So that was the first time I kind of flirted with executive leadership. Then after the crash, switched tactics and went into development leadership roles at both PeopleSoft and SAP. I felt that what we did a lot of things right with that carrying and a few things wrong. And the development process, the rigor of the development process, and really understanding how to satisfy customers effectively was one of those. And so to learn, I said, well, let me go run engineering teams, and then I'll really, really learn that. And then we had a very short stint at Cisco, and got recruited by Godfrey Sullivan to be CEO of Splunk, to be the head of sales at Splunk, that he called SVP of Field Operations, all go-to-market things. And after a year and a half, got fortunate enough to be elevated to the CEO of Splunk, and spent 6 years as CEO of Splunk, where we grew the company from hundreds of millions of ARR to over 3 billion in ARR, while we took it from an on-prem company to a SaaS company and changed buying centers a few times, completely changed go-to-market routes, all while being public. The most fun I've ever had, the most stressed I've ever been, that's for sure.
Okay, there's so many different things I want to talk about. Everything from pivoting and changing as a public company with pressure from shareholders and the board for decisions. Also talk about, at the very beginning, you had mentioned the idea of just circulating knowledge and communication and education being such a driving force. And then also, your career, you went to several different companies. If there's any major pivot there, that if it hadn't have happened, your career wouldn't be at the level it is right now. But before all that, I also want to ask, I know there's a lot there. How important, because this is a little of the prep call before, how important is team sports, do you think, to helping prepare a person for their career, for the working world?
I tend to gravitate towards a few hiring profiles, and a D1 athlete in general is one that I think is a great one. College D1 athlete, veterans, women trying to return to the workforce are some of the themes. But going back to team sports, I deeply valued my time with team sports. And we moved, as I said, we moved every year. And my mechanism for fitting in was I was a decent natural athlete. It's like, well, if I can be decent at sports, and in most locations is team sports, then I'll be included. I won't be beat up as much. Just like for the first month or two, I'll be beat up, and then people realize I might be accepted. But what I learned through sports in general, just the discipline, the selflessness, the willingness to go through pain, the understanding that pain is part of life. Like, it's all about learning and growth, and you don't get any type of interesting results without some suffering. Suffering being more elective. Like, we all feel pain. Suffering is something that we get to choose or not choose. And if you don't choose it, you probably don't get interesting results. And then when team sports help with a little bit of an exclamation point is more of the selflessness, that you can have a great game, but if the team doesn't do well, that you walk away. If you're a normal human, you walk away a little bit dissatisfied. And it's all about, what do we do as a collective? What's your role? And how do you help other people? And how do you make sure that you don't bleed into other people's areas when it doesn't make sense to do that? And so many of those dynamics are really important for businesses, because businesses, I used to call a business a family, and I realized it's really not, because a family you're stuck with for life. It's more of a team. Like, we're on a team. And as long as you are a high contributor to the team and move the team forward, you get to be part of the team. And when you're not, you've got to either change your careers or choose a new team. There's usually a reason why you're no longer doing that, but you can't be part of the team anymore. And I think the team sports background helps people understand that it's life is about change and challenge and suffering and contribution and playing well with others. And if you can do that well, then you hopefully learn and grow, and you get to be part of the team for a longer time period.
I'm just wondering if every performance review turned into that team talk of, we might have to trade you to the other office.
There is a theme in feedback. There really is. And I think the people that I've been lucky enough to surround myself with, they all get it. It is not, there are professions you can have where you're the lone wolf, and that's great too, right? But know yourself, and then choose the profession that works well for you. And for me, it really is the fabric, the composition It goes back to the purpose. Like when you have a group of people together and you're all striving for this mission and to do something hard, that for me is what gets all of my excitement and energy, both the purpose and then the teamwork.
Well, speaking of purpose and going back to kind of one of the other things that you'd mentioned about getting knowledge out there to the world, why go towards the direction of, cybersecurity or that? Why not go more towards the direction of social media or one of those platforms? Because, your career in the Valley, jumping around those businesses, you could have gone to one of those, platforms instead.
So I did never went B2C. I kind of realized early on what I liked about B2B is businesses. You can work backward from the problem a little bit more with a little bit more fidelity. If you really understand the way a business or a function or a process operates and you spend time, you can decode, all right, this is what I need to do to make something successful. And my flirting as a consumer or being around people with B2C businesses, there's a lot of magic. Like, what is the consumer really going to like and not like is not as easy as systematic. Not that it's easy to B2B, but as systematic as B2B. So I've always been in B2B, but I've been all over the map with B2B. I've been in development tools and infrastructure optimization, data and business intelligence, and ERP applications. So I played all over the stack. With Splunk, Splunk was really my first time that we weren't cyber. When I got to Splunk, it was all about IT operations. How do you help people find the needle in the haystack when the system goes down? The airline reservation system went down. You've got a bunch of monitors. You didn't expect it. What the heck happened and how you get back up quickly? We got drawn into cyber from our customers. The beauty of Splunk was it was a non-structured, non-deterministic data lake, what I affectionately called a garbage lake. And for any of us in data, and I started at Oracle and spent a lot of time in the data world, relational database, object-oriented databases, object relational data warehousing, you really have to start with the schema. It's all about garbage in, garbage out. And you've got to be thoughtful. What are you going to put in here? Because you've got to be all extracted thoughtfully also. And for IT operations interrogation, it's really difficult to do that. Right? The key for Splunk was logs are chaotic, non-structured, non-consistent, but if you can find ways to interrogate them, you can actually find the unknown unknown. So let's create a non-structured data lake. And because of that, our IT folks that we're talking to all the time were grabbing data that they directly controlled and data that they didn't control to try and do that diagnostics. And eventually the cyber team started coming over and saying, hey, you guys are having amazing success doing mean time to resolution on the data you have. Can we look at it? Like, we're got the same problem. We're just got breached and we got to figure out what the heck happened and how do we get to root cause? And all of a sudden our buying, at the same time we're moving the company to be a SaaS company, at the same time that we're trying to figure out different go-to-market angles, we're completely shifting buying centers because the customers are drawing us there to cyber. And during that time, I get this massive appreciation for, I go all the way back to why did I get into tech? The security of this landscape is paramount for the entire landscape working. If you can draw doubt on whether I can trust my online world, then our online world collapses. You have to have consistency with the online world. Without the online world, at this point in time, I can't imagine we couldn't support 8 billion people if we didn't have our online presence. In the Western world, you can't even get a donut anymore without being online. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, you have to have an online presence. So keeping that secure and safe really has become something deep. Like, it's deeply in my soul. It's why I get up so passionate with Aviatrix every day, because I think part of what we do is so critical to keeping that safety. So I think for the remainder of my working contribution, it will probably have some deep affiliation with the cyber landscape because of that understanding that at least I got to.
I'm kind of wondering how you'd mentioned the cybersecurity team was talking to this team, was talking to that team. It's just going back to the team theme of, that inner company, we're all working together. If they didn't feel comfortable or confident in asking for help or feeling permission, those two groups, because so many companies, and especially in the Valley, we hear of this group, they work in silos. They work, they don't have that cross communication. How by having a company with that, how much of an advantage would you say would have over these more siloed structured business companies?
I think it is one of the first principle cures that we need. And so if I think about it from my CEO perspective, you have to have specialization to operate a company once you get above a handful of folks. And you set up those specialization functions actually as quasi-competitive. I've got my dev team. If I think about my IT landscape, I've got my dev team focused with all their metrics on crank out as much code as you can, go as fast or faster than the business. And then we throw like an infrastructure management team or a cyber team or a QA team, almost with competing criteria. Say, you got to slow those guys down. The code better be secure. It better not consume way too many resources on AWS or wherever you're deploying it. It's got to be high quality. And that purposeful architecture, because through that diversity, you get something that works. It's going as fast as it can, but it's secure and it's got high quality and it's not too wasteful. Those are the right mechanisms, but then you have to have a cut, which is we're all on the same team. Like you can't battle with those folks. Like you're all shareholders, work together and figure it out. So finding technologies that can bring those together, and Splunk was excellent at that because we never structured the data. So you could get all this data in, and it's a jumble of stuff, and different people could look at it as long as someone said it's okay to look at it. I pay for the license. You can play with it if you want for a little while, but then let's share the costs. Then you could bring these teams together. And that is the mission at Aviatrix, is we secure the world's digital fabric. So that's the high-level mission. And then the line right below that is part of how we do it. We do it by bringing development, security, and infrastructure teams together. We get them to actually see the world more consistently on the same page. Because right now, security is literally getting run over, and for good reason. Like we're going through a Gen AI and agentic AI cycle, and every CEO like me is saying, go as fast as you can. Like we can't be left behind. What are we doing with AI? And the poor CISO is in the background saying, wait a second, wait. Let's think about this. Like we do not want to completely risk our organization. So without allowing the CISO to operate at the speed of development, we're going to really create risk, even more risk than already exists. And it's pretty bad right now across these organizations. So I think having that cut through, you sell to somebody, but for them to do their job, they have to work with other people. I think is a really important element, kind of a first principle or foundational thinking structure when you're creating products. Rarely do you get to serve just one buying center that never has to work with a different buying center.
I definitely want to dive more what you're doing at Aviatrix, but before even that, let's talk a little bit about, so Splunk, huge, semi-retired. I'm thinking, why step back in the game? Also emotional. Talk about that ups and downs, because I mean, one area that has been coming up a little bit in conversations on the podcast, and that is around mental wellness, stress of founders. And I'm curious, in your career, especially, and Splunk had a meteor, that rise was fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about, and plus you did mention earlier about, the meditation and everything else going into your experience, any best practices, any of that around the mental wellness, the emotional stress, ups and downs with taking a company, going public, the pressure of stockholders, the board, and that.
So I'll go through both, like how to try and keep sanity, and then what it was like to retire.
I like to laugh when you said that.
Yeah, it is a challenge, I'll tell you. I'd been CEO twice before Splunk, and one of my early childhood desires was I want to be a public company CEO. My grandfather's brother-in-law was a CEO, was one of the earliest Fortune 500 CEOs at this company called Thatcher Glass. So I grew up with these stories of this god that in his 40s became CEO of this big public company and how awesome that was. And so somewhere in the back of my mind that that was important. And when Godfrey and the board nominated me to be CEO, it's like, I've been CEO twice before of private companies. I've been general manager of multi-billion-dollar divisions where I run the entire gamut from product management all the way through to sales. Like this, it's the same job. And what I didn't really grok was how different it was when you're in the public eye every day. That there's an emotional switch of, oh my God, like I'm marked to market every single day. And everyone's watching what I'm doing. And you get that with the board of directors and your employees to an extent as a private company, but it's just not the same as a public company. And it was really hard. Like there were some dark years. The first couple of years, I had therapists and I had coaches. And one of the coaches walked in my office and she said, "Can we just do a breathing thing for 5 minutes? I'm looking at your chest and I'm worried because you're shallow breathing. You're just so stressed." And so it was a lot of personal work on how do I be deeply emotionally involved in this cause, which you have to be, but not take it personally. And she actually had me go through an exercise of, all right, what's your worst fear? Because my worst fear is I get publicly fired in a super humiliating way and I can't ever work again. And I had to go away and write for a couple months on, so what would happen? What would that look like? And with my eventual answer, I came back, like, maybe I should just do that. That actually sounds pretty cool. I was going to buy a bed and breakfast in South Carolina. I don't know why. And just hang out with my wife and kids there. And it's like, that could be a much better life. But it was helping with what's really at stake here. Right? Again, take the job seriously. Don't take yourself so seriously. And you've got a purpose and a mission to fulfill. And if you're clear on the mission, and we did a lot of work at Splunk before I got there on the mission, and we did a ton of work at Aviatrix as I came in to try and make that front and center, then it enables you to depersonalize a lot of it because you're just fulfilling the mission. And if the mission's important, you'll make a contribution. If you achieve it, if you're the company that does it, great. If not, but you helped others achieve it, great also. And that's more or less where I'm with Aviatrix, given what we're trying to do right now.
I like that mission driven. That's very interesting. Okay, so mental wellness there. Splunk, why not retire? Why not go on the sunset? And how does that transition? Like, what is it like for a CEO of a public company to then step away from the limelight for a little bit? I mean, you're from having your calendar down to the minute to what do I do now? I'm guessing it's not like that, but talk a little bit about that transition and how long were you there until you're like, yeah, I got to do something else.
Yeah.
I got to build Aviatrix.
I'm sure a lot of CEOs talk about this. It is very dislocating. And I was pretty tired when the board made the decision to make the transition that they did. It had been a really, really hard 8-year run at Splunk and 6 years of running as fast as I could as CEO through all those transformations. So the first couple of months was awesome. It was my cortisol levels went back to normal. All my blood work looked good. I lost like 20 pounds. I worked out all the time. But that the first dislocation was, holy cow, no one is calling me anymore. Like, do I even matter? Versus the influx. It was the opposite 2 months earlier of, holy, how do I get away from being harassed all the time for being needed on everything? And once you get past that, it was okay. Like that part I didn't miss. What I wound up missing was the tribe, the team, the purpose, the mission. And I tried to fill that with, let me do board work, let me do advising work, let me invest in different companies. And maybe in some future that would work for me. But what I felt was I could be relevant and I could help organizations, I could help people, and I could probably get some decent returns if I was smart in my investing. But I was a lone wolf. I was coming in and out. I wasn't part of a bigger mission and part of a more defined team and a purpose. And I missed that. And that's what drove me back.
Well, with that, how would you advise other CEOs then? Hey, this is what you should do a few months before you're going to step out of that role. Here's what you should do month of stepping out of the role. Here's 6 months. from your experience, how could you guide or give advice to someone that is saying, this is my last year and I'm stepping away 3 quarters from now, 4 quarters from now?
If you one, I don't think that we really can know what a transition is going to look like. I think that you can try and do as good of a job as you can, but until you're in something, it's hard to determine if that's really going to work for you. But if I had had more time to prep, I would have spent a lot more time in the year prior to the transition. I would have gotten on at least one board or 2 boards. And I would have begun to spring up this advising and investment group on the side so I could feel how much value am I getting from that? Is that really going to light my fire every day or not? Because that would have told me that probably not. It's good. It's like, it's not a bad thing, but it's not the thing that's going to get me running out of bed every morning. And then I would have taken 6 months off, like really off, and then slowly begun to look for a job, realizing that at least that wasn't going to work. Post Aviatrix, I'm not so sure. It's getting back. I've loved it. It's been amazing 2 years, and hopefully there's a lot more exciting work to do. But let's say it's 3 years from now and it's time to make a transition. I might actually want to retire that time. And then I've got to figure out, what does that look like? Am I going to go back to school and take classes? Am I going to try and teach? And am I going to try another swipe at this board and advising work? Am I going to take up a hobby I haven't thought of? My wife transitioned out of tech and actually took some time off to really focus on raising the kids, and then stumbled totally accidentally into country music songwriting, and can't play an instrument. She was a English and journalism major, so she's a great writer. But didn't even know how to read music. So that's where there's only so much you can preordain in life, that you need to be open-minded and to see when the universe is going to strike you with something, and then hopefully be in tune enough to heed that call. So I'm not sure how to make it super easy, honestly.
Okay, so let's move away from the future and talk about the present, and also, this also dictates a little the future as well. I'm kind of curious of your thoughts around artificial intelligence and how it seems like, do you believe that it'll be concentrated in a concentrated power among a few companies, or do you think this opportunity is going to be distributed, open doors for many businesses? And I'm also kind of curious the risk, maybe from a business or society, all those, that this scenario could play out.
Very, very good question. There are so many different dimensions to answer. So 3-4 years ago, as transformers became a little bit more obvious that they were going to be something that was really going to begin to change the world, I went through probably a similar fear cycle a lot of people did. Of, does this mean the end of humanity? How quickly is it going to actually come? I'm a huge fan of Yuval Harari, who wrote Sapiens, and he was on the soapbox probably 2.5-3 years ago of, this is the end of the world. And I still have that in the back of my mind. Is a super intelligence close, and is it going to be malevolent or beneficial? And we don't know the answer. Going back to, like, what do you do in retirement? And my question, my deep hope, my experience, if I go back through amazing synthesizers in history, like the Albert Einsteins of the world, they become more pacifist as they become better at synthesizing. They become more interested in a universal power, probably not man-made religion, but like there's a force out there somewhere. Like, the more you see, the more empathy and humility and curiosity you have about the world. And if AI keeps going the way it is, it seems odd that would turn super malevolent. It could. And we've got to guard against that, but it's hard to guard against it too. Like, the genie's out of the bottle on this thing. Most of it's open source. It's moving globally at a pace that's hard to control. It's what's going to happen is going to happen. And I hope it works out for the best of humanity, and we'll find out over time. I do worry about concentration. Everyone knows that you need data, massive amounts of data, you need compute, you need things that are difficult to procure and difficult to harness. And the companies that have the power to do that right now, the Microsofts, the Googles, at this point, OpenAI, with the amount of money they've raised, Anthropic, if they get their $100 billion valuation, obviously Grok and XAI with Elon, if you can do that, then maybe you'll be able to concentrate power a little bit more. And there's that risk. But if I go back again to how does universe work? Centralization has never been the way that I can see the universe working. Right now, from everything we can tell, the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate, decelerating rate. We're seeing more stars, more galaxies, more planets being born every single day. When I look at the world around us, that same thing happens. The entire evolutionary cycle is based on emergence and experimentation. It's all about diversification. Centralization is bad. Centralization seems to be counter the laws of the universe. When I was growing up, we had 3 channels. And now we've got, 1 million? I don't even know how many channels we have. Infinite with YouTube. But we had a handful of magazines. And now, so everything seems to go towards specialization, nichification, and diversification. And I don't know why AI would be any different. There is the challenge because of some of those elements that everyone's talking about. But if I can't control it, and I believe it's going to be more benevolent and it's going to follow the laws of the universe, it's going to be very, very broad-based and help. And I can see it with the specialty small language models, the vector DBs, and the verticalization that's happening to really get the true value above the general purpose foundational large language models. The rate of change, I love change. And that's part of why we moved all the time and I'm in tech. I really gravitate towards that. First time in my life where I truly feel overwhelmed. Every week, it's hard to make a decision as a tech buyer. Every week, we choose a amazing Gen AI enabled or agentic AI marketing solution, and we use it for a month. And then a month later, it's like, oh no, this other thing is 10 times better. It's like, oh, why? What did I do? Like, why did I use that one? So that rate of change seems to go with. It's going to be hard to centralize it, but maybe not. And we've got to work against it. I don't think the universe works well with centralization and control.
Speaking of the world and control and that, how do you see AI affecting network security moving forward?
Yes. So I think there are 2 really interesting elements on this. Is one, how do you use agentic and Gen AI with network security tools? I think it's going to be absolutely paramount. And it's something that we're working hard on making sure that we're doing the right thing with what we're rolling out with Aviatrix. But what does Gen AI do and agentic AI do to cloud landscapes for organizations? And what threats do we face? So if I pivot to promoting Aviatrix, or at least the category that we found, or the problem that we found, I think we've got a unique angle on how to solve it. A zero trust stance. If cybersecurity is critically important for our way of life as we know it today, then adopting there are 3 foundational runtime areas on the tech landscape where you can actually both detect and stop and enforce countermeasures, both huge exposure areas and then huge control areas. One is endpoint. If we think about what is our technical world, it's a bunch of compute that's distributed, which are these different endpoints. The second is identity. You've got actors that are doing things with compute. And the third is network. You're trying to tie these things together so that the people using the compute can talk to other things and you can actually get stuff done. And right now, and zero trust was a shift that started 10, 15 years ago as you opened up the landscape with the internet and with broad-based technology access. It's like, I don't know really who somebody is, and there's bad actors out there, and I've got to assume malintent first and then open up access once you've proven that there's no malintent. And we've done a decent job of that with identity and access, something like a Zscaler, let's say, mainly the ZTNA providers, and with endpoint, someone like CrowdStrike. We've ignored, for the time being, network. And I think it's mostly because network is something that's in the cloud. As everyone moved to the cloud and all the critical workloads went to cloud, the infrastructure is hidden. It's the underlay. Everything is virtualized on top. And so like, who cares about the infrastructure? It's just magical. It just works. And that's true. It's incredibly effective what the hyperscalers have done, but the objects that you put into their data center as a organization are your responsibility. And those objects are connected through networks. And the bulk of the network traffic is not an end user coming to the cloud. It's all the activity inside the cloud and between clouds and SaaS and other services. We're hard language there, but workloads, Kubernetes clusters, core PaaS services like S3 buckets or a Snowflake third-party SaaS service. And the internet is the vehicle of communication between all those workloads. So without bringing a zero trust stance to the network activity between those workloads, the exposure area that every organization has is horrific because it's relatively easy for a bad actor to land somewhere. If you look at the typical organization, they've gone from a handful of data centers that they've protected the perimeters of to thousands or tens of thousands of workloads that are sitting in multiple clouds. And every one of those needs a perimeter. And they're all talking to each other. And all a bad actor have to do is land on one of those workloads and just patiently sit and watch the network traffic. And then they'll identify through a graph what the entire network looks like. And they'll go from a non-impactful workload that doesn't matter to eventually get to where they want to get to, which is a dangerous application or sensitive data, and either shut it down or exfiltrate it. And without a zero trust cloud workload capability, organizations are completely exposed. And Gen AI and agentic AI put that on steroids because there are more workloads being formed and deployed. They tend to be ephemeral, meaning they're not stateful. They're short-lived. They spin up and spin down. They form their own data pathways. And agentic AI is taking, you had 1,000 employees that were making all those calls that were creating that activity. Every employee is going to have 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 agents working on their behalf. So you're taking the number of actors up on an exponential level. So you're increasing the workloads exponentially. You're increasing the data pathways and the randomness of their creation exponentially. You're creating the actors exponentially. Holy cow, man. If you don't have a zero trust workload stance, it was bad already. Like a day doesn't go by without a breach to 5 that I read about. Just hold on. And that's before we talk about how attackers are using agentic and Gen AI to become much more expert. So really important. It's my mission. It's my mission right now.
You mentioned before about your example, over this week, this marketing tool might be incredible. The next week, this other marketing tool might be incredible. And then right there, you also talked about how like exponential these attackers could be. How does one at the CEO, at the top level, really plan? And what I mean by that, in the past, you'd hear a 5-year plan. In fact, you'd hear some people, we have a 100-year plan. And that how long are the plans now? And I mean, is it like month to month, quarter by quarter, year by year? How long are plans for a company? How quickly do they have to adjust? What does that look like right now?
So I think the concept of a 5 or 10 or 100-year plan is more driven based on the best you can do with foundational and first principle thinking, which I think is important for any business. What are the foundational factors that make this business important or relevant? And what kinds of things could either enhance or threaten those factors? So for something like Aviatrix, just making it real, this zero trust cloud workload security is a mission critical factor. You've got things talking to things using unsecure channels like the internet, and that must be fixed. And that has probably a long time horizon before it is really fixed. So having a framework for how do I guide the business, you can actually operate with longer cycles with that high level framework. What do we do quarter by quarter and week by week, I think has always been difficult for companies. And it's gotten really difficult now because there's so much constant noise and distraction and change. And I think Gen AI, agentic AI, can be a solution to that. We've had very, very little insight into how a business actually operates. I grew up quarter of my career on ERP systems, and ERP systems do a very good job of managing very consistent processes that have low collaboration rates with important, discrete data. A payroll system, a general ledger, an accounts receivable system, the rules don't change often, and you can't get it wrong. But it literally is 3% of the real work being done in a company, 5%. It's the vast minority. The real work is being done on a much more dynamic basis, day to day. That's where I think Gen AI can help. So if I go back to my BI and data warehousing worlds and my ERP worlds, what we're trying to do with our tech at Aviatrix is create a agentic and Gen AI framework for the company, add different tools on top of that framework, but use that framework so we can actually get game tape, going back to how we started the conversation. What happened the last hour across the entire company? What emails were sent, what collaborative activities were had, what decisions were made, what did we learn? And then what does that mean as far as how do we tune or adjust what we do? To make that work, you need your 3, 5, 8-year framework of where are you trying to get to. But the adjustment periods, I've always hated annual planning processes. And because the only thing I can tell my teams always is I guarantee you this annual plan is wrong. I'm 100% certain it is wrong. It's just how wrong is it going to be? But if we don't do it, if we don't know where we're going and the general factors how we're going to get there, then we can't adjust. We don't know where we were wrong and why we were wrong and how do we learn? How do we get better? And I think those cycles are getting so tight now. We're trying to get it down to weekly business reviews at Splunk because there's so much information. I think businesses will get down to minute business reviews. It's going to be crazy how quickly you can adjust these organizations. I think you're going to have to be competitive right now.
And then we got time for maybe one or two more questions before wrapping up. But I'm kind of curious, in your opinion, what's more impactful for a company, being too early to a market trend or being too late to adopt it?
I tend to drift more towards being too early because of the learnings. That people change management, I found is the hardest thing. And again, just going back to Gen AI as an example, trying to help people understand that if they do not run towards it, with open arms and speed and enthusiasm, they are going to become irrelevant really quickly. 5 months, 8 months, 12 months. We do not have much time as humans other than a handful of professions where it's going to be difficult for Gen AI to infiltrate right away. So you've got to become really excited about it or you're just not going to have a job. It's so hard to communicate that to folks. And so even if you're too early, because it's such a long lead time to get people to change their perspective and change their habits, it's worthwhile. But you have to bake in, this thing's probably going to fail. Now, what we were trying to do with Gen AI 2 years ago when I first landed at Aviatrix, what we're doing now is night and day. We chose many of the wrong tools. We took many of the wrong tactics, but without that learning, I'm not so sure that we'd be where we are now. So I'd rather be too early than too late.
And then, Doug, if there's anything we did not cover that you want to talk about, now's the time. And also give our audience a little, what to expect with Aviatrix. I mean, I guess in 5 years is too far in the future, but at least the next year or something that people can be on the lookout for.
So as we started, I'm very mission and purpose driven. I've got to really want to enthusiastically show up every day because what we do in any of our jobs requires so much sacrifice and so much suffering. I've got to believe that it's worthwhile, that we're doing something that's really important for the world. And right now, my focus is 80% on evangelizing and clearly communicating how important the zero trust cloud workload perspective is. That unless organizations are willing to add the third leg to the zero trust stool, They don't have a stool. A stool with two legs is liability. It is not a benefit. And right now they are focused on identity and access and endpoint. It's like, oh, you do not have a stool. I don't care if you use Aviatrix. Go figure out how exposed you are on workload to workload communications, because it impacts my way of life. The more retailers that go down, the more airlines that go down, the more banks that go down, that all of us lose faith in our online world. And as we lose faith, our society no longer works. So get your goddamn act in gear. That's my number one evangelism right now. Behind that is I really am excited about what we have. Company's a 10-year-old company. I inherited something very different. It was more about cloud networking. We've tuned it into the cyber world because that's a lot like Splunk. That's what customers were actually using it for. We thought they're using it for networking. And the more that we looked, it's like, no, you're using it for network security. And that I know more about security than I do networking. I'm more passionate about security, but it was really where our customers dragged us, a lot like Splunk. So right behind that is, how do you take the very unique architecture and capabilities that Aviatrix has and help fill that void? And if we do it right, then we're in the very early innings. I'm back to evangelizing that this thing exists and people should pay attention to it. Then I would love for this to become a multi-billion-dollar company again, with a culture that people appreciate. I really love the team, the culture of Splunk, and I'm trying to take a lot of those lessons that I learned at Splunk and apply them with some hopefully positive iterations here. So that will fulfill I came back for a reason. We've got this important mission and purpose. We've got this great team. We're all in it together. And that's what I hope will happen. That's what we're working hard to make happen here. And then we'll see. There's a lot of randomness. As we all know, it's really difficult to create a winning and high growth company.
I guess I do have one more question for wrapping things up. I'm really curious. And this goes kind of some of the things we've already talked about planning and adjusting the course of a ship while sailing. But coming into a company, you just mentioned Aviatrix, 10-year-old company that was being used more for one thing, but the clients were using for another. How does a CEO step into a role at a new business and say, okay, people, I'm brand new here, but you're going to have to just trust me. This is how we're adjusting things. This is our new path forward. How does that happen?
This is my deep advice for boards. Create a clear dividing line between what a board does and what the operating team does, because board is really just some governance and oversight and hiring and firing the CEO. And then have deep respect for the complexities of operations. Way too many boards go through an interview cycle, and one of the things we're asking for is create your detailed 1-year plan in your first 90 days. And my answer to that would be, my first 90 days is an aggressive listening tour. And if I can, especially with LLMs, I can manufacture a really cool looking 90-day plan that I will guarantee you will be 100% wrong, because until you dive deep into the organization and meet the individuals and meet with at least 75 to 150 customers and look them in the eye, and you have no effing idea of what the business actually does and what it needs. None. You're guessing. And as a board, by nature, you're guessing. So stop it. Stop it. You're making everyone's life difficult and unnecessarily distracting, unless you want to go spend 5 months in the bowels of the company doing a bunch of jobs. Then absolutely, in a board meeting, you've got full rights to have a deep opinion on the operational details of a company. Until then, please do not even talk about it, and don't even make suggestions. Because if I'm so stupid that I don't understand that we should be investigating mid-market, then fire me. Just fire me. Like, I know the obvious things. That's never the hard thing. The hard thing is, how do you actually operationalize it? How do you execute it? And do that. It is so nuanced. It's so difficult. And there isn't a recipe book that applies across multiple companies, because the dynamics are so different within these companies. So the only way that I had a board, the only reason I really came to Aviatrix, honestly, is I knew 3 of the 5 board members extremely well. And their pitch was, it's yours. Like, here's the keys to the kingdom. We understand who you are and what you do. Cancel all board meetings for a year. Like, we don't want to hear about, just tell us when you figure it out. It's like, awesome. I don't even care what the company does. That I'll come do that just because you understand that deep foundational principle. And the fact that we were an abstraction layer networking, and I knew how important cloud networking was because we took Splunk to the cloud, and so I had some interest in what they were doing. But that dividing line is so important, and so much dysfunction happens within companies that should be run more effectively because there isn't clarity between that positive interaction that should happen between the board and the operating team.
That's fantastic. All right, Doug, I want to thank you for being on this week's episode of the Silicon Valley podcast. If anyone wants to find out more about Aviatrix, what's the best way to go about doing it?
Aviatrix.com. It's a constant work in process. But at this point in time, we've actually tuned our messaging around this cloud native security fabric that we're evangelizing the category that really encapsulates this zero trust cloud workload problem that we've identified. And there's a lot of work we're doing to educate. So if you all are interested, please come back all the time, because we're evolving our thinking, we're iterating our thinking, and we're learning every single day.
Fantastic. And for our audience out there, remember Doug will be at the August 14th event, Create the Future, in San Francisco. And go to our website, the Silicon Valley Podcast, check out our archives and find out what we're up to. And for our audience out there, connect with me on LinkedIn at Shawn Flynn. Find out what I'm working on outside of the podcast, where I'm an investment banker focused on mergers, acquisitions, growth capital, secondaries. But more than anything, I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode, because I know you got to listen to it multiple times to get all the details and knowledge that Doug shared. And with that, Doug, thank you once again for being on the Silicon Valley Podcast.
I really appreciate being on, and congrats on all the iterations and innovation that you're driving for your business too, Shawn. It's super exciting.